Well, I mean, last night Obama gave this interview where he's offering support for Occupy Wall Street. We've had Biden, Pelosi, the rest of the Democratic machine offer their support for it. Obama's basically trying to exploit the whole movement as an election campaign gimmick. He's trying to pose as a populist. And we predicted this would happen several weeks ago, along with other people like Gerald Celente. When in reality, his 2008 campaign, completely funded by Wall Street. He's received the most money from Wall Street out of any candidate. His cabinet stuffed with Wall Street insiders. He's even more reliant on Wall Street in 2012. Of course, we know a lot of the money's also gone behind Mitt Romney. But, I mean, for Obama to pose and embrace this movement when he's Mr. Wall Street himself, is the ultimate Wall Street puppet, just shows how people are trying to co-opt this. But according to the polls which you covered last night on Nightly News, it's probably a little over half of Americans actually see right through that, and they still blame Washington itself more so than Wall Street. So it's a desperate attempt by the Obama campaign to wrap himself in this phony cloak of populism. But, I mean, it looks like it's probably going to fail.
But, I mean, what do you call that? How do you steer people towards the crony capitalism problem? Just as we saw in the Daily Bail today, that the Federal Reserve facilitated absorbing basically hundreds of trillions of dollars in derivatives and guaranteeing that they'd be insured by the FDIC, Paul. I mean, that is a Wall Street problem, but it's certainly a Washington issue as well. But we're not allowed to talk about the Federal Reserve.
Well, no, I mean, you had the reports at Occupy Wall Street demonstrations where they were saying, if you've got a Ron Paul sign, get out of here. And it's a fundamental problem that comes up time and time again. I think it's fair to say, judging from the PBS poll, which I talked about, which was in the Wall Street Journal yesterday, probably about 50% of those protesters in New York and DC and other places are aware of the true scope of the problem, that it's more than just Wall Street, as you were just mentioning. But then you've got this strain, which is becoming increasingly dominant, I'm afraid to say, who are basically communists, socialists, and collectivists. And they're being led by the likes of Francis Fox Piven and all these other leftist elites to call for the destruction of capitalism and its replacement with this state-mandated redistribution of wealth by violent force. I mean, we had the Communist Party USA a few days ago march in Chicago.
Stay there, Paul. We're coming up on a break. The 1%, I think it's more like the 0.1%, maybe the 0.01%. Let's get more into this issue and how we could get more sophisticated on the problem. Occupy Wall Street, the energy is there. Which direction will it go? Stay tuned. Infowars.com. Back on the other side. More analysis ahead. Essentially wrapping up our analysis of Occupy Wall Street. Paul, we were cut off by the break. Can you please continue with the point you were making?
Yeah, I was just making the point that from the poll figures that we've seen, it looks like there's about 50% of the demonstrators who understand the full scope of the problem and also understand that communism and socialism aren't the answer. But then there's another hardcore. I mean, this is a quote from a New York Post columnist who went and visited them. Quote, "It's not an overstatement to describe Zuccotti Park as New York's Marxist epicenter. Flags with the iconic face of the Marxist revolutionary Che Guevara are everywhere. The only American flag I saw was hanging upside down. The occupiers openly refer to each other as comrade, and just about every piece of literature on offer advocated socialism in the Marxist tradition as a cure-all for the inequalities of the American economic system." So, I mean, you've got Communist Party USA marching in Chicago, and, they get cheered by the demonstrators. And a lot of people don't want to hear this, but 50% of that movement, I mean, there's a lot of great people involved, but the ones leading the chorus, and you can see this in the Adam Kokesh interviews, they're collectivists. They want to concentrate more power in the hands of government.
Well, that's the issue, really. Even in a rosy analysis, it's been extreme abuses of big government, all the insider deals and the rest of it that's helped contribute to so much of these problems. And many people, as you point out, want another big government solution, want more big government, think that taxing the, quote, rich will somehow fix our issues. Of course, the austerity measures to tax the middle class and lower class are equally flawed. But how are we going to begin to rein in these offshore interests?
Well, by understanding that it's the Federal Reserve that, you know, gave the green light for the trillions in bailout money to foreign banks mainly. That doesn't seem to be a central problem with a lot of these protesters. You know, they're not occupying the Fed. I mean, we had a protest last week where Alex Jones went and led a rally, but primarily they're occupying places in New York. They're not occupying the White House lawn when these are the sources of most of the problems. And their solution to the problem of corporate greed is to give the government power to seize wealth by force, by violent means if necessary. And remember that a third of the protesters, according to this poll I mentioned in the Wall Street Journal, support using violence to enforce their ideas. And they want to concentrate that power in the hands of government to oversee this program of, quote, fair redistribution, which, of course, you know, every example throughout history tells us that this never works and that it always ends up with an even more tyrannical and corrupt state while, you know, the country itself rots away and the people are enslaved. I mean, maybe that's why North Korea came out and embraced Occupy Wall Street, because that perfectly describes their country. So, as he said, there's a tipping point, and it's getting to the level where the communists and the collectivists are starting to take this over.
You know, the other side of the Occupy Wall Street is the police occupation. I mean, we've got a kind of militarized police action down there, and whatever the views of these protesters may be, why are police beating them, slamming women's heads, dragging people into banks, basically protecting the banks directly, arresting people trying to close accounts, and all the rest of it? Well, let's talk about it on the other side. We also have Webster Tarpley. It is the second hour, and we are just getting started with the full-scale all-points analysis. We have Webster Tarpley coming up on the other side of this break, then later Alan Watt. But right now we are with Paul Joseph Watson, PrisonPlanet.com editor. Also in the news today in the London Telegraph, White House accused of Barack Obama green screen trickery. So much has the economy been bottomed out that even Barack Obama's PR stunts have become illusory and hollow. The White House has been accused of digitally adjusting President Barack Obama's weekly address to the nation to give the impression he was sitting in front of a car assembly line in Detroit, when in fact it was just later digitally added. He was not in fact giving a speech in front of a car plant. Just kind of another little note in this symphony of economic disaster that's spiraling out of control. It's no wonder people are outcrying over the economic implosion. The question is, where will the energy go, Paul? And what is happening with the police state on the police side of things of this Occupy Wall Street movement?
Well, I mean, you're right. It gives the police the opportunity to crack some heads, and a lot of the American people will support it because these people will have been demonized by some sectors of the mainstream media. The police go in with a heavy-handed response, and a lot of the American people support it. A similar thing happens in England when these protests take place. So, yeah, it's a police state bandwagon, and of course they get the opportunity to do that. And that's only going to continue as these occupation events are prolonged. I'm sure certainly in Europe, the cold weather's going to put a stop to a lot of it, because people simply, you know, won't be able to camp out all night. But certainly in America, I can see this going on for several weeks and months to come, yeah.
Yeah, and then you've got reports of donations from major banks to the police department. You've got police on video helping corral protesters back into banks so they could be arrested for allegedly causing a disruption when they simply tried to close their bank accounts, regardless of if they were protesters. What are we seeing in kind of this fascist nexus between the Wall Street big banks, who are really behind the Wall Street problems, and the police there to defend them?
Well, of course, they're completely allied with each other in a close relationship. I mean, same with Obama. I mean, he's the biggest Wall Street puppet going, but in this poll, which I've been talking about, 50% of the protesters say they're going to vote for him again. So I mean, it's the same people falling for the same tricks over and over again. But it's only half of them. You know, in years gone by, it might be 70, 80% of them falling for these same political stunts again and again. So it's up to us, the alternative media, to really get in there and try and dictate the conversation. Otherwise, these Obama lobby groups will do so, and they'll continue to define where all this energy goes in the long run.
I don't know. Sometimes I think people like being conned, that they almost find power in people who are obviously lying and telling them what they want to hear. I don't know where this goes.
You're right. They're lazy. I mean, it's not easy to see through it on a certain. It's not easy to see, oh, this guy's involved in Occupy Wall Street. 3 years ago, he was working with the State Department to do this. 2 years before that, he was doing that. People are never going to look into that because they don't have the time to scratch below the surface. So it takes a bit more gumption and interest in the subject to actually find out what's going on, which is why it's easier for them to fall for these simple-minded stunts every time. So that's our job, to prevent that from happening.
And, of course, the way the media is portraying it. And, yeah, I mean, we just have to get ready for the same kind of Tea Party co-opting with this Occupy Wall Street energy. What kind of new taxes will they impose based on the supposed demands? We have Webster